Ashenmeres Triumph. When her father was imprisoned, Lady Isolde of Evermere had only one hope: Sir Aldrich Blackwell, a knight whose loyalty was as uncertain as his past. He studied her with dark amusement. "You seek a villain to save you, my lady," he murmured. "Tell me, how much of your soul are you willing to sell?" Chapter 1. The Falcon's Cage. The stone walls of Evermere Castle seemed to weep with the damp chill of late autumn. Lady Isolde of Evermere traced the outline of a falcon, etched into the frost-covered windowpane of her father's study. The bird, wings outstretched, yet forever trapped, was the sigil of their house, a symbol of freedom and strength, now a cruel mockery of their current state. Her father, Lord Edmund, a man whose booming laughter once echoed through these very halls, was now confined to a dank cell in the dungeons below, accused of treason against King Oberon. Isolde's breath hitched, forming a small cloud in the frigid air. Treason. The word itself tasted like ash in her mouth. Her father, loyal to a fault, a man who had bled for the crown in countless battles, now branded a traitor. It was a lie, a calculated maneuver by the viperous Lord Valerius, whose covetous gaze had long lingered on Evermere's fertile lands and strategic position. Isolde knew, with a chilling certainty that settled deep in her bones, that Valerius had orchestrated this, weaving a web of fabricated evidence and whispered accusations. She clenched her fists, the delicate fabric of her gown straining against the force. She was no longer the sheltered, pampered daughter of a powerful lord. She was a woman cornered, desperate, her family's fate hanging by the thinnest of threads. Her options were dwindling faster than the daylight filtering through the narrow windows. Her pleas to the king had fallen on deaf ears, blocked by Valerius's carefully constructed wall of influence. The court, once a haven of allies, now regarded her with a mixture of pity and suspicion. The heavy oak door creaked open, admitting a gust of even colder air and the somber figure of her elderly maidservant, Elara. Elara had served the family since Isolde was a babe, her wrinkled face a map of loyalty and shared grief. "My lady," Elara's voice was a low, mournful rasp, "the king's men, they are here. They demand an inventory of everything." Isolde's stomach twisted. An inventory. A prelude to seizure. Valerius was moving quickly, tightening his grip, leaving her no room to breathe. It was a blatant display of power, a calculated humiliation designed to break her spirit. "Let them come, Elara," Isolde said, her voice surprisingly steady, a facade masking the turmoil within. "Let them see that Evermere has nothing to hide." But she knew they did have something to hide. Not gold or jewels, but something far more dangerous. Desperation. And desperation could breed recklessness. As the king's men, their faces cold and impersonal, began their methodical search, stripping the castle of its dignity, piece by piece, Isolde retreated to the chapel. The small, stone chamber offered a semblance of sanctuary. The flickering candlelight danced across the stained glass depiction of Saint Elara, the patron saint of lost causes, her namesake. Isolde knelt before the altar, her hands clasped tightly in prayer, but the words felt hollow, empty. Her faith, once a comforting presence, now seemed as fragile as the frost on the windows. She had sent out ravens to every corner of the kingdom, to every lord who had ever sworn fealty to her father. But the responses, if any, were slow, cautious, laced with veiled excuses and empty promises. Everyone feared Valerius's wrath. Everyone feared the king's capricious judgment. There was only one name left, one possibility that sent a shiver of both fear and a desperate kind of hope through her. Sir Aldrich Blackwell. A name whispered in taverns and shadowed corners, a knight of renowned skill and questionable allegiance. A man known for his ruthlessness, his shadowed past, and his uncanny ability to navigate the treacherous currents of court politics. He was a mercenary, a sell's word, some said, loyal only to the highest bidder. Others claimed he was a fallen angel, a knight stripped of his honor, seeking redemption in the shadows. He was also her father's godson, a bond forged in the crucible of war, a connection that, however tenuous, might be her last resort. Isolde had met him only once, years ago, at a tournament. She remembered his eyes, dark and intense, holding a hint of both amusement and a deep, unsettling sorrow. He had seemed a creature of contrasts, a knight clad in shining armor, yet carrying an aura of darkness about him. He was currently residing, according to her last, hastily scribbled message from a sympathetic contact in the king's court, at a small, dilapidated keep on the fringes of the Whispering Woods, a place known for its wildness and the rumors of ancient magic that clung to its mist-shrouded trees. A place as dangerous and unpredictable as the man himself. Isolde rose from her knees, the cold stone biting through the thin fabric of her gown. The decision had been made. It was a gamble, a desperate throw of the dice, but she had nothing left to lose. She would seek out Sir Aldrich Blackwell. She would offer him whatever he desired: gold, land, even herself, if that was the price. She would sell her soul to save her father, even if it meant consorting with the devil. As she left the chapel, a single ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds, illuminating a dust mote dancing in the air. A fleeting, fragile moment of beauty in a world consumed by shadows. It was a sign, she told herself, a flicker of hope in the encroaching darkness. She had to believe it. Her father's life, and the future of Evermere, depended on it. The falcon, though caged, still had claws, and she was about to unleash them. Chapter 2. A bargain struck in moonlight. The journey to the Whispering Woods was arduous, a testament to Isolde's dwindling resources and the fear that gripped the land. She traveled with only a handful of loyal guards, their faces grim, their hands never far from their swords. The once familiar roads were now fraught with danger, bandits emboldened by the weakening of Evermere's authority and the ever-present threat of Valerius's spies. The air grew colder, heavier, as they entered the woods. The trees, ancient and gnarled, seemed to press in on them, their branches intertwined like skeletal fingers, blocking out the already fading sunlight. The silence was unsettling, broken only by the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig under their horses' hooves. It was a place of shadows and whispers, a place where the veil between worlds felt thin. Blackwell's keep, when they finally reached it, was less imposing than Isolde had imagined. It was a small, sturdy structure, built of gray stone, more a fortified house than a true castle. It stood on a slight rise, overlooking a dark, still lake, its reflection shimmering in the water like a ghostly apparition. Smoke curled from a single chimney, a sign of life in this otherwise desolate landscape. As they approached, the heavy wooden gates creaked open, revealing a courtyard bathed in the pale light of the rising moon. A lone figure stood waiting for them, silhouetted against the flickering torchlight. Sir Aldrich Blackwell. He was taller than she remembered, broader of shoulder, his presence filling the space. He wore simple, dark clothing, a stark contrast to the elaborate finery of the court. His face, weathered and lined, was framed by dark hair streaked with silver, a testament to battles fought and hardships endured. But it was his eyes that held her captive, dark and piercing, assessing her with an intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. Lady Isolde, his voice was a low rumble, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very stones of the courtyard. To what do I owe this unexpected visit? Isolde dismounted, her legs stiff from the long ride. She met his gaze directly, forcing herself to project an air of confidence she did not feel. Sir Aldrich, I come seeking your aid. A flicker of something amusement, perhaps, or maybe a hint of cynicism crossed his face. My aid? You believe I am in a position to offer aid to the daughter of a condemned traitor? The bluntness of his words stung, but Isolde refused to flinch. My father is innocent. He was framed by Lord Valerius. Blackwell raised an eyebrow, his gaze unwavering. And you believe I can somehow rectify the situation? You have connections, Isolde said, choosing her words carefully. You have a reputation for achieving the impossible. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Reputations are often misleading, my lady. They are built on whispers and rumors, on half-truths and outright lies. I am willing to pay any price, Isolde said, her voice trembling slightly despite her efforts to control it. Gold, land, anything you desire. He studied her for a long moment, his eyes searching, probing. Then, he stepped closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to tilt her head back to meet his gaze. The scent of wood smoke and leather clung to him, a primal, earthy scent that both unsettled and intrigued her. You seek a villain to save you, my lady, he murmured, his voice a low, seductive whisper that sent a shiver down her spine. Tell me, how much of your soul are you willing to sell? The question hung in the air between them, heavy and dangerous. Isolde felt a knot of fear tighten in her chest, but she refused to back down. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to falter now. Whatever it takes, she whispered back, her voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. I will do whatever it takes to save my father. A slow smile spread across Blackwell's face, a smile that did not reach his eyes. Very well, Lady Isolde. We have a bargain. He extended his hand, his fingers long and strong, the calluses on his palm a testament to his warrior's life. Isolde hesitated for a fraction of a second, then placed her hand in his. His grip was firm, almost possessive, sending a jolt of something akin to both fear and excitement through her. The moonlight bathed them in its ethereal glow, casting long, dancing shadows across the courtyard. It was a pact made in darkness, a bargain sealed with a touch, a desperate gamble that would bind their fates together, for better or for worse. As he held her hand, staring with those dark, unreadable eyes, she felt a shift within her, a hardening of resolve, a willingness to embrace the shadows if it meant finding the light. The falcon was no longer caged. It was flying into the unknown, guided by a night as dark and dangerous as the night itself. Chapter 3. The Whispers of Evermere. The return to Evermere was a study in contrasts. Where once Isolde had ridden with a sense of belonging, a rightful heiress returning to her ancestral home, she now felt like an intruder, a supplicant in her own castle. The presence of Sir Aldrich Blackwell, walking the halls with an air of quiet authority, only amplified the unsettling shift in power. The servants, once familiar and comforting, now moved with a nervous energy, their eyes darting between Isolde and the enigmatic knight who shadowed her. Whispers followed them like a persistent draft, snaking through the corridors, carried on the dust motes that danced in the shafts of sunlight. Some whispers were of fear, of the dark knight who had come to claim Evermere for his own. Others were of hope, of a savior who might somehow wrest their lord from the king's grasp. And some, Isolde suspected, were of a more scandalous nature, speculating on the nature of her bargain with Blackwell. She could feel the weight of their gazes, the unspoken questions, the judgment. It was a constant reminder of her precarious position, of the tightrope she was walking between salvation and ruin. Blackwell, for his part, seemed oblivious to the whispers, or perhaps simply unconcerned by them. He spent his days meticulously examining the castle, its defenses, its resources, its vulnerabilities. He spoke little, observing much, his dark eyes missing nothing. He questioned the guards, the stable hands, the cooks, even Alara, his inquiries sharp and insightful, probing for any detail, any clue that might shed light on Valerius's plot. He was a warrior, that much was clear, but he was also a strategist, a tactician, a man who understood the subtle art of warfare, both on the battlefield and in the treacherous corridors of power. He moved with a quiet grace, a controlled power, that spoke of years spent honing his skills, mastering his body and his mind. One evening, after a meager supper eaten in strained silence, Isolde found him in her father's study, standing before the window, gazing out at the darkening landscape. The room was lit only by a single candle, casting long, dancing shadows across his face, highlighting the harsh lines of his jaw, the deep furrows of his brow. He looked weary, she realized, burdened by a weight she could not fully comprehend. "What are you looking for?" she asked, her voice soft, breaking the silence. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. Answers, he said simply. Pieces of a puzzle that doesn't quite fit. And, do you find them? He hesitated, then shook his head. Not yet. Valerius is meticulous. He has covered his tracks well. Isolde felt a familiar wave of despair wash over her. Then what hope is there? Blackwell stepped closer, his presence filling the small space. Hope is a fragile thing, my lady, he said, his voice a low murmur. But it is not easily extinguished. It can flicker even in the darkest of nights. He reached out, his fingers brushing against a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. The touch was unexpected, sending a jolt of awareness through her. She held her breath, mesmerized by the intensity of his gaze. Your father was a strong man, he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. A loyal man. Men like that do not make enemies easily. But they do inspire loyalty. And loyalty is a powerful weapon. He was talking about more than just her father, Isolde realized. He was talking about himself, about the choices he had made, the path he had chosen. He was a man of secrets, a man haunted by his past, but he was also a man of honor, however tarnished it might be. I trust you, she said, the words surprising even herself. They were not entirely true, not yet, but they were a step, a bridge across the chasm of uncertainty that separated them. His eyes softened, a flicker of something akin to warmth appearing in their depths. Trust is a precious gift, my lady, he said, one I do not take lightly. He turned back to the window, the moment broken. But something had shifted between them, a subtle realignment of their positions, a recognition of their shared vulnerability, their shared desperation. The whispers of Evermere continued, but Isolde no longer heard them as a chorus of judgment. They were a reminder of the stakes, of the lives that hung in the balance, of the bargain she had struck, and the hope, however fragile, that flickered in the darkness, fueled by the presence of the dark knight who had sworn to protect her. She had chosen her champion, and he in turn had chosen his cause, and that made all the difference, she realized. Chapter 4. Scars of the Fallen. Days bled into weeks, marked by the slow, deliberate rhythm of Blackwell's investigation and the growing unease within Evermere's walls. Isolde found herself drawn to him, a moth to a flickering flame, both fascinated and wary of the darkness he carried within him. She sought him out, not just for updates on his progress, but for the strange, unsettling comfort she found in his presence. He was a man of contradictions, she discovered. A hardened warrior who could recite poetry by heart. A ruthless strategist who showed a surprising tenderness towards the injured stable boy who had been kicked by a horse. A man shrouded in shadows who seemed to yearn for the light. One afternoon, she found him in the castle's training yard, practicing swordsmanship with one of her guards, a young man named Gareth. Blackwell moved with a fluidity and precision that was breathtaking to watch, his blade a blur of silver in the sunlight. He disarmed Gareth effortlessly, multiple times, yet he did so with a patience and a quiet instruction that spoke of a natural teacher, a mentor rather than a mere opponent. Isolde watched from the sidelines, captivated by the display of skill and power. When the practice session ended, Gareth, flushed and breathing heavily, bowed to Blackwell with a respect that bordered on awe. Blackwell nodded in acknowledgement, then turned his gaze towards Isolde. My lady, he said, his voice slightly breathless. You grace us with your presence. I was admiring your skill, Isolde said, feeling a warmth rise to her cheeks. He sheathed his sword, his eyes meeting hers. Skill is born of necessity, my lady, of survival, and of pain, she added, her voice barely a whisper. He looked at her sharply, his gaze probing. You speak from experience? Isolde hesitated, then nodded. The loss of my mother when I was a child. The constant threat of war, and now my father. He stepped closer, his presence a comforting weight in the vast, empty space of the training yard. Scars, he said, his voice low and resonant. We all carry them. Some are visible, others hidden deep within. He reached out, his fingers brushing against the silver falcon pendant she wore around her neck, a gift from her father on her last named day. The touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a shiver through her. "This represents your family," he said, his gaze lingering on the pendant. "Your heritage. Your burden. And my hope," Isolde added, her voice firm. He nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Hope is a powerful weapon, my lady, but it must be tempered with steel." He turned to leave, but Isolde stopped him, placing a hand on his arm. "Sir Aldrich, tell me about your scars." He stiffened, his body going rigid. He looked down at her hand, then back at her face, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, he remained silent, the only sound the rustling of the leaves in the nearby trees. "My scars are not a tale for a lady's ears," he said finally, his voice rough, guarded. "I am not just a lady," Isolde said, her voice trembling slightly. "I am a woman who has seen her world crumble around her. I am a woman who has made a bargain with a Knight of Shadows. I deserve to know the man I have entrusted with my fate." He studied her for a long moment, his dark eyes searching, probing. Then he let out a long, slow sigh. "Very well, my lady," he said. "But do not expect a tale of heroism and glory. My story is one of loss, of betrayal, of redemption sought, but perhaps never fully achieved." He led her to a small, secluded bench beneath the shade of an ancient oak tree. He sat down, his posture stiff, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. He began to speak, his voice low and hesitant, recounting a tale of a young knight, full of idealism and ambition, who had risen quickly through the ranks, earning the favor of the previous king, Oberon's father. A knight who had loved, deeply and passionately, a woman who was not of his station, a woman who had been promised to another. A knight who had been betrayed, his love stolen from him, his honor stripped away, his name dragged through the mud. He spoke of battles fought, of lives lost, of the darkness that had consumed him, the bitterness that had festered in his heart. He spoke of the years he had spent wandering the land, a mercenary, as Sel's word, seeking oblivion in violence and bloodshed. He spoke of the slow, painful process of rebuilding himself, of finding a semblance of peace in the solitude of the whispering woods. As he spoke, Isolde listened, her heart aching for the young knight he had once been, for the pain he had endured, for the scars he still carried. She saw, beneath the hardened exterior, the remnants of the man he had once been, the man he still could be. He paused, gazing out towards the distant, hazy outlines of the mountains, a familiar sorrow clouding his eyes. "And that," he said with a sigh, looking down at his scarred hands, "is why I am here. Your father showed me kindness when no one else did. He offered me a purpose after everything. I owe him a debt I can never truly repay." The vulnerability in his eyes, raw and exposed, moved her deeply. The Knight of Shadows had revealed his heart, and it was far more complex, more wounded, than she could have ever imagined. She gently placed her hand on his, feeling the calluses, the rough texture, mirroring the scars he bore within. He looked up, surprised, and their eyes locked. "You are not alone, Sir Aldrich," she murmured, "in your scars, or in your fight." The whispered promise, born of shared pain and growing understanding, hung between them, a fragile thread connecting two souls scarred by the harsh realities of their world. The setting sun cast long shadows, painting the sky with hues of orange and purple, a silent witness to the deepening bond between them. Chapter 5. The Tournament of Treachery. News arrived with the dawn, carried by a breathless messenger, his horse lathered and exhausted. King Oberon, in a display of supposed magnanimity, had decreed a tournament to be held in honor of Lord Valerius's upcoming nuptials, a celebration of the very man who had orchestrated Lord Edmund's downfall. The messenger also brought a royal summons Lady Isolde was commanded to attend, a thinly veiled threat wrapped in the guise of courtly etiquette. Isolde felt a surge of anger, a bitter taste in her mouth. It was a blatant insult, a calculated humiliation designed to showcase Valerius's triumph and her own powerlessness. But beneath the anger, a flicker of something else ignited defiance. She would attend the tournament. She would face her enemies, her head held high, and she would use the opportunity to her advantage. Blackwell, who had been present during the messenger's delivery, watched her with a knowing look. "A trap," he said simply, his voice devoid of emotion. "Perhaps," Isolde replied, her voice tight with controlled fury. "But it is also an opportunity to observe, to gather information, to remind everyone that Evermere is not yet defeated." Blackwell nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "And an opportunity for Valerius to make a mistake, to reveal his hand." Preparations for the journey to the capital began immediately. Isolde, despite her limited resources, insisted on a display of strength and dignity. She chose her finest gown, a deep crimson velvet embroidered with silver falcons, a symbol of Evermere's enduring pride. She selected her most loyal guards, their armor polished to a gleaming shine, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. Blackwell, however, remained a figure of understated power. He wore his usual dark clothing, his only concession to the occasion a simple silver chain bearing the crest of his own, long-disgraced family, a black wolf howling at the moon. It was a subtle act of defiance, a reminder of his own fallen status, and a silent challenge to those who had wronged him. The journey to the capital was tense, the air thick with anticipation and unspoken anxieties. Isolde found herself constantly looking to Blackwell, drawing strength from his quiet confidence, his unwavering presence. He, in turn, seemed to anticipate her every need, offering a reassuring word, a subtle gesture of support, a protective presence that eased the constant knot of fear in her stomach. The capital city, when they arrived, was a riot of color and noise. Banners bearing Valerius's sigil, a golden serpent coiled around a sword, were everywhere, draped from buildings, fluttering from flagpoles, a constant reminder of his ascendance. The streets were thronged with people, nobles and commoners alike, eager to witness the spectacle of the tournament. Isolde and her retinue were met with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Whispers followed them, snide remarks and veiled insults, a constant barrage of subtle attacks designed to undermine her morale. But Isolde refused to be cowed. She held her head high, her gaze fixed straight ahead, ignoring the stares and the whispers, projecting an air of regal indifference. Blackwell, walking beside her, was a silent shield, his presence a deterrent to any overt acts of aggression. He was a wolf among sheep, his dark eyes scanning the crowds, alert for any sign of danger, any hint of treachery. The tournament itself was a lavish affair, a display of wealth and power designed to impress and intimidate. The king sat upon a raised dais, surrounded by his courtiers, his gaze cold and indifferent. Valerius, resplendent in gold and jewels, sat beside him, his face flushed with triumph, his eyes constantly seeking out Isolde, a smug, predatory smile playing on his lips. The events began with a series of jests, knights clad in shining armor charging at each other with lances leveled. Isolde watched with a detached interest, her mind focused on the political undercurrents that flowed beneath the surface of the spectacle. She observed the interactions between the nobles, the subtle alliances and rivalries, the whispered conversations and furtive glances. She noticed, with a growing sense of unease, that Blackwell was drawing a great deal of attention. His reputation, it seemed, had preceded him. Many of the knights regarded him with a mixture of fear and respect, while some of the ladies watched him with a barely concealed interest, intrigued by his dark, brooding presence. During a break in the jousting, Valerius approached Isolde, his smile widening as he drew near. "Lady Isolde," he said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "How gracious of you to attend. I trust you are enjoying the festivities?" "As much as one can enjoy a celebration of injustice," Isolde replied, her voice cool and steady. Valerius's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, even more pronounced. "My dear Lady Isolde, you wound me with your words. Surely, you understand that circumstances have changed." "Circumstances can change again, Lord Valerius," Isolde said, her eyes meeting his. "Fortunes rise and fall. The wheel of fate turns constantly." He laughed, a harsh, unpleasant sound. "You cling to old sayings, dear lady. while I forge a new reality." He gestured to the tournament grounds. "Look around you. This is the future. And your father and Evermere are relics of the past." Before Isolde could retort, a herald's trumpet blared, announcing the next event, a melee, a mock battle involving multiple knights fighting on foot. Isolde's breath caught in her throat as she saw Blackwell step forward, volunteering to participate. He had not sought her permission, nor had he given her any warning. He moved to the center of the arena, his dark figure a stark contrast to the brightly colored armor of the other knights. He drew his sword, the steel gleaming in the sunlight, and waited, his stance calm and poised, his eyes fixed on his opponents. A hush fell over the crowd. The whispers ceased. All eyes were on the Dark Knight, the fallen angel, the man who had come to challenge the new order. Isolde watched, her heart pounding in her chest, a mixture of fear and a strange, exhilarating sense of anticipation coursing through her veins. The trap had been sprung, she knew, but not in the way Valerius had intended. Blackwell was the bait and the predator, and the unknown variable in a game of deadly consequences. He gave her a single, fleeting glance across the arena, a silent acknowledgement, before the clash of steel erupted and the battle began. Chapter 6. Shadows of the Past. The melee was brutal, a chaotic clash of steel and muscle, a whirlwind of dust and sweat. Blackwell fought with a controlled fury, a deadly grace that set him apart from the other knights. He moved like a shadow, striking swiftly and decisively, disabling his opponents with a minimum of effort, yet never resorting to unnecessary violence. He was a warrior who fought to win, not to kill, a distinction that was not lost on Isolde. She watched, mesmerized, her breath held captive in her chest. She saw the fear in the eyes of his opponents, the grudging respect that grew with each passing encounter. She saw the whispers start again, not of disdain this time, but of awe, of speculation, of a growing recognition that the Dark Knight was more than just a legend. Valerius, too, was watching, his smug smile replaced by a mask of cold fury. He had underestimated Blackwell, Isolde realized, underestimated his skill, his determination, his appeal. The crowd, initially hostile, was now captivated by the Dark Knight, cheering him on, drawn to his aura of power and mystery. As the melee progressed, a pattern began to emerge. Several knights, seemingly acting in concert, began to target Blackwell, ganging up on him, attempting to overwhelm him with sheer numbers. It was a clear violation of the rules, a blatant attempt to eliminate him from the competition, orchestrated, Isolde suspected, by Valerius himself. She wanted to cry out, to protest the injustice, but she knew it would be futile. The king would not intervene. He was complicit in Valerius's schemes, a willing puppet in his game of power. Blackwell, however, was not easily overwhelmed. He fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, his sword a blur of motion, deflecting blows, parrying attacks, using his superior skill and agility to evade his attackers. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched. Then it happened. One of the knights, a hulking brute with a scarred face and a cruel smile, managed to land a blow on Blackwell's arm, a glancing strike that nevertheless drew blood. Isolde gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She saw Blackwell stagger, his arm hanging limp at his side, his face contorted in pain. The other knights pressed their attack, sensing weakness, closing in for the kill. Isolde felt a surge of despair, a wave of hopelessness washing over her. It was over, she thought. Valerius had won. But then, something extraordinary happened. Blackwell, despite his injury, roared with defiance, a primal sound that echoed across the arena. He shifted his sword to his other hand, his left hand, the hand he had rarely used in the fight. And he began to fight with a renewed ferocity, a skill that was even more breathtaking than before. He moved with lightning speed, his blade a whirlwind of death, disabling his opponents with swift, precise strikes. He was unstoppable, a force of nature, a warrior who had embraced his pain, his weakness, and transformed it into strength. The crowd went wild, cheering him on, chanting his name, their allegiance shifting with the tide of battle. Valerius watched in stunned silence, his face a mask of disbelief and rage. In the end, Blackwell stood alone in the arena, his chest heaving, his body covered in sweat and blood, his sword dripping with the well, not blood, thankfully. He has only disarmed and incapacitated his opponents. He had won. He had defied the odds, overcome the treachery, and emerged victorious. He looked towards Isolde, his eyes meeting hers across the distance. A faint smile played on his lips, a smile of triumph, of defiance, of something more. A connection. Isolde felt a tear roll down her cheek, a tear of relief, of pride, of admiration. She had witnessed something extraordinary, something that transcended the brutality of the tournament, something that spoke to the resilience of the human spirit, the power of hope, the enduring strength of a bond forged in shadows. Later that evening, after Blackwell had been tended to by a healer, a gruff, elderly woman who seemed strangely unfazed by his reputation, Isolde found him in a secluded alcove of the palace gardens. The moon was full, casting a silvery glow over the manicured lawns and sculpted hedges. He was sitting on a stone bench, his injured arm bandaged and resting in a sling. He looked vulnerable, she realized, stripped of his armor, his defenses down. "You fought brilliantly," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I thought you were going to." He looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers. He finished, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Not today, my lady."
"Not yet."
"But your arm," he shrugged. "A minor wound. It will heal." "You fought with your left hand," she said, her voice filled with wonder. "I did not know you were ambidextrous." He smiled, a genuine smile this time, a smile that reached his eyes. "A secret weapon," he said. "One I have kept hidden for many years." He hesitated, then added, "It was my mother's doing. She taught me to use both hands, to be prepared for anything." His mother. The woman he had loved, the woman who had been taken from him. Isolde felt a pang of sympathy, a deeper understanding of the pain he carried within him. "The shadows of your past," she whispered. "They still haunt you." He nodded, his gaze drifting towards the moon. "They always will, my lady. But they do not control me. Not anymore." He looked back at her, his eyes intense, searching. "I fight for you now, Isolde," he said, his voice low and earnest. "For your father. For Evermere. For a future that is not yet written." His words, spoken with such conviction, such sincerity, sent a shiver through her. She reached out, her hand covering his, a gesture of comfort, of connection, of something more.
A spark.
A promise. A hope. As they sat there, bathed in the moonlight, the shadows of the past seemed to recede, replaced by a glimmer of light, a fragile, tentative beginning of something new, something beautiful. The treacherous tournament had revealed not only Blackwell's skill but also a shared past trauma and, more importantly, a burgeoning trust. Chapter 7. The Serpent's Kiss. The victory in the melee had shifted the balance, if only subtly. Blackwell's display of skill and resilience had earned him a grudging respect, even from his enemies. The whispers about him had changed, from those of fear and suspicion to those of admiration and speculation. He was no longer just a dark knight, but a force to be reckoned with, a potential threat to Valerius's carefully constructed plans. Isolde, too, felt the shift. The courtiers who had previously shunned her now treated her with a cautious deference, unsure of her alliance with Blackwell, wary of his power. She used this newfound leverage to her advantage, navigating the treacherous currents of court politics with a renewed confidence, gathering information, forging alliances, planting seeds of doubt about Valerius's legitimacy. Valerius, however, was not one to be easily deterred. He was a serpent, cunning and patient, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. He knew that he could not openly challenge Blackwell without risking further alienating the king and the court. He needed to be more subtle, more insidious. He began to shower Isolde with attentions, feigning a concern for her well-being, offering veiled apologies for the misunderstanding regarding her father. He invited her to private dinners, sent her lavish gifts, attempted to charm her with his wit and his wealth. It was a transparent ploy, a blatant attempt to win her over, to isolate her from Blackwell, to drive a wedge between them. Isolde saw through his charade, but she played along, pretending to be flattered by his attentions, using the opportunity to glean information from him, to probe for his weaknesses. It was a dangerous game, a dance with deception, but she was willing to risk it, for her father's sake, for Evermere's future. One evening, Valerius invited Isolde to a private supper in his chambers. It was a lavish affair, the room lit by dozens of candles, the table laden with delicacies, the air filled with the scent of exotic perfumes. Valerius was at his most charming, his smile smooth and seductive, his words carefully chosen to flatter and disarm. "My dear Lady Isolde," he said, raising a glass of wine in a toast, "to reconciliation, to a new understanding between our houses." Isolde raised her own glass, her eyes meeting his. "To justice," she replied, her voice cool and steady. Valerius's smile faltered for a moment, then returned, even more pronounced. "Justice is a subjective concept, my lady. What one man considers just, another may consider cruel." "Truth is not subjective, Lord Valerius," Isolde said, "and the truth will eventually prevail." He laughed, a soft, seductive sound. "You are a woman of conviction, my lady. I admire that. But conviction can be a dangerous thing. It can blind you to other possibilities." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was cold, clammy, sending a shiver of revulsion through her. "I offer you a chance, Isolde," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "A chance to escape the shadows of your past. A chance to join me in the light." He leaned closer, his breath warm on her face, the scent of his perfume overpowering. "Marry me, Isolde," he said. "Become my wife. Share my power. Share my future." It was a blatant proposition, an attempt to buy her loyalty, to silence her opposition, to control her through marriage. Isolde felt a surge of disgust, a wave of anger washing over her. She wanted to slap him, to scream at him, to denounce him for the villain he was. But she controlled herself, forcing a smile to her lips. "Your offer is generous, Lord Valerius," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "But I am afraid I must decline." His smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. "You dare refuse me?" he hissed, his voice barely a whisper. "I am not afraid of you, Lord Valerius," Isolde said, her eyes meeting his unflinchingly. "I will not be bought. I will not be silenced. And I will not rest until my father is freed and justice is served." He stood up abruptly, knocking over his chair, his face contorted in rage. "You foolish girl," he spat. "You have made a grave mistake. You have chosen the losing side. And you will pay the price for your defiance." He stormed out of the room, leaving Isolde alone in the flickering candlelight. She sat there for a long moment, her heart pounding in her chest, her body trembling with reaction. She had defied him. She had rejected his offer. She had thrown down the gauntlet. She knew that she had made a powerful enemy, that she had placed herself in even greater danger. But she also knew that she had done the right thing. She had remained true to herself, to her father, to her values. As she left Valerius's chambers, she saw Blackwell waiting for her in the corridor, his face a mask of concern. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "I am," Isolde said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I fear I have made things worse." He placed a hand on her arm, his touch reassuring. "You did what you had to do," he said. "You stood up to him. You showed him that you are not afraid." "But he threatened me," Isolde said. "He said I would pay the price." Blackwell's eyes darkened, his jaw tightening. "He will not harm you, Isolde," he said, his voice fierce, protective. "I will not allow it." He took both of her hands into his thumbs softly caressing the delicate skin. "I know," she murmured. His expression, normally so guarded, now reflected a raw vulnerability. "I failed once, protecting someone I His voice trailed off. You won't fail again. Their eyes met, a spark igniting between them, a silent promise exchanged in the dimly lit corridor. The serpent had kissed, but the falcon had refused the venom. The game had escalated, and the stakes were higher than ever before. The next move was Valerius's, but Isolde and Blackwell stood together, their bond strengthened by the shared threat, their resolve hardened by the looming danger. Chapter 8. A Glimmer of Trust. The aftermath of Isolde's confrontation with Valerius was a period of tense anticipation. The court buzzed with rumors, whispers of the Lady of Evermere's defiance, of the Dark Knight's growing influence, of Valerius's simmering rage. Isolde found herself walking a tightrope, balancing the need for caution with the desire to continue her investigation, to find the evidence that would exonerate her father. Blackwell was her constant shadow, his presence a reassuring shield against the veiled threats and subtle machinations of the court. He was her protector, her advisor, her confidant. She found herself increasingly relying on him, not just for his strength and his skill, but for his wisdom, his insight, his understanding. He, in turn, seemed to open up to her, revealing glimpses of the man beneath the hardened exterior. He shared stories of his past, not just the tragedies, but also the moments of joy, of camaraderie, of hope. He spoke of his love for his mother, of his loyalty to his friends, of his belief in justice, however elusive it might be. She learned that he was a scholar as well as a warrior, that he had a passion for history, for philosophy, for the stars. He showed her the constellations, pointing out the patterns in the night sky, telling her the stories behind the names, the myths and legends that had been passed down through generations. One evening, they found themselves alone in the palace library, a vast, cavernous room filled with ancient tomes and scrolls. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and leather, the silence broken only by the crackling of the fire in the hearth. Blackwell was searching for a specific book, a chronicle of the previous king's reign, hoping to find some clue, some evidence that might shed light on Valerius's past, on his connections to her father's downfall. Isolde watched him, her heart filled with a strange mixture of emotions. Gratitude, admiration, respect, and something more. Something deeper, something warmer. She had never felt this way about any man before. She had always been too focused on her duty, on her family, on her responsibilities. She had never allowed herself to feel. Aldrich, she said, her voice barely a whisper. He turned, his eyes meeting hers. Isolde? She hesitated, then took a deep breath. Thank you, she said. For everything. For your help. For your friendship. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face, making him look younger, less burdened. Friendship is a two-way street, my lady, he said. You have given me purpose. You have reminded me of what it means to fight for something worthwhile. He stepped closer, his presence filling the small space between them. He reached out, his fingers brushing against a strand of hair that had escaped her braid. The touch was light, fleeting, but it sent a jolt of electricity through her. You are different, she said, her voice trembling slightly. From the man I met years ago. He nodded, his eyes searching hers. We have both changed, Isolde, he said. We have both been scarred. But scars can also heal. They can make us stronger. He reached out, his hand cupping her cheek. His touch was warm, gentle, sending a wave of heat through her. She leaned into his touch, closing her eyes, savoring the moment, the feeling of connection. I trust you, Aldrich, she whispered.
Completely.
It was the truth. She had placed her life, her family's fate, in his hands. And she did not regret it. She trusted him, not just with her safety, but with her heart. He leaned down, his lips brushing against her forehead, a chaste, tender kiss that sent shivers down her spine. It was not a lover's kiss, not yet, but it was a promise, a pledge, a beginning. And I trust you, Isolde, he whispered back. With everything I have. At that moment, a noise from the corridor startled them. They broke apart, their hands dropping to their sides, their hearts pounding in their chests. It was just a servant, passing by, unaware of the intimate moment they had shared. But the spell had been broken. The reality of their situation, the danger that surrounded them, came crashing back. They were in the lion's den, surrounded by enemies, playing a dangerous game. But they were not alone. They had each other. And in that moment, in the quiet sanctuary of the library, surrounded by the wisdom of ages, they had found something precious, something fragile, something worth fighting for. A glimmer of trust, a spark of hope, a budding love. Chapter 9. The Price of Freedom. The fragile peace, the tentative trust that had blossomed between Isolde and Blackwell, was shattered by a summons. A royal decree, delivered with chilling formality, announced that Lord Edmund's trial would commence within the week. The king, under Valerius's manipulative influence, was accelerating the process, forcing a confrontation, leaving Isolde and Blackwell with little time to prepare. The news hit Isolde like a physical blow. The knot of fear that had been a constant companion tightened, squeezing the air from her lungs. She had hoped, desperately, that they would have more time, that they would find the evidence they needed to prove her father's innocence. But Valerius was tightening the noose, and her options were dwindling rapidly. Blackwell, ever the stoic, reacted with a quiet fury, his eyes darkening, his jaw tightening. He knew, as Isolde did, that the trial was a sham, a carefully orchestrated performance designed to legitimize Valerius's seizure of Evermere. The outcome was predetermined, the verdict already written. "We have to find something," Isolde said, her voice trembling with desperation. "Some proof, some witness, anything that can expose Valerius's lies." Blackwell nodded, his mind already racing, considering the possibilities, weighing the risks. "There is one possibility," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "A dangerous one." He explained his plan, a desperate gamble that involved delving into the darkest corners of the capital, seeking out informants, bribing officials, risking exposure and arrest. It was a plan fraught with peril, but it was their only hope. Isolde, despite her fear, agreed without hesitation. She would do anything, risk anything, to save her father. She had come too far, sacrificed too much, to give up now. They spent the next few days working tirelessly, following leads, questioning contacts, navigating the treacherous underworld of the capital. They moved in shadows, avoiding detection, relying on Blackwell's network of informants, his knowledge of the city's secrets, his ability to blend in with the outcasts and the forgotten. They discovered a trail of forged documents, of bribed witnesses, of coerced testimonies, all pointing to Valerius's elaborate scheme. They found a former servant of Valerius's, a man who had been dismissed for disloyalty, who was willing to testify, for a price, about his master's treachery. But time was running out. The trial was fast approaching, and they were still missing a crucial piece of evidence, something that would irrevocably link Valerius to the frame-up, something that would sway the king, or at least the more honorable members of the court. Then, they received a breakthrough. One of Blackwell's informants, a shadowy figure known only as the Rat, brought them news of a secret meeting, a gathering of Valerius's closest conspirators, where they planned to finalize their plans for the trial, to ensure that Lord Edmund was condemned. It was a risky opportunity, a chance to eavesdrop on the meeting, to gather the evidence they needed. But it was also a trap, a potential ambush, a deadly game of cat and mouse. Blackwell wanted to go alone, to protect Isolde from the danger. But she refused. She would not let him face this alone. She was his partner, his equal, and she would share the risk, just as she shared the hope. They disguised themselves as servants, infiltrating the palace, making their way to the secluded chamber where the meeting was to take place. They hid in a darkened alcove, their hearts pounding in their chests, listening to the voices of Valerius and his conspirators, their words chilling, their intentions clear. They heard Valerius boasting of his plans, of how he had manipulated the king, of how he would crush Evermere, of how he would claim Isolde as his prize. They heard the details of the fabricated evidence, the names of the bribed witnesses, the plan to silence anyone who dared to speak the truth. Isolde felt a surge of rage, a burning desire for revenge. But she controlled herself. knowing that they needed to gather the evidence, to escape undetected, to bring Valerius's treachery to light. Then, disaster struck. One of the conspirators, a sharp-eyed guard, spotted a flicker of movement in the alcove. He raised the alarm, shouting, "Intruders! Spies!" Blackwell reacted instantly, pulling Isolde with him, running through the corridors, pursued by guards, their escape route cut off. They were trapped, cornered, their carefully laid plans unraveling before their eyes. Blackwell fought with the ferocity of a cornered wolf, protecting Isolde, buying her time to escape. He was outnumbered, but not outmatched, his sword a blur of motion, deflecting blows, parrying attacks, holding his ground. He yelled, "Isolde, run, get out of here, now." She, with tears streaming down her face, whispered, "I won't leave you." He gave her a fierce, but gentle shove towards a concealed door. "You must, my love. It's the only way." Isolde, her heart breaking, her mind racing, knew that he was right. She had to escape, to bring the evidence to light, to save her father, to save Aldrich. She slipped through the concealed door, finding herself in a narrow, winding passage, a secret escape route known only to a few. She ran, her lungs burning, her legs aching, tears streaming down her face, praying that Blackwell would survive, that they would meet again, that their fight would not be in vain. The price of freedom, she realized, was far steeper than she had ever imagined. And she was willing to pay it, whatever the cost. Chapter 10. Beneath a Cloak of Stars. Isolde emerged from the secret passage into the cool night air, her heart pounding, her breath ragged. She was outside the palace walls, in a secluded garden, hidden from view. She had escaped, but at a terrible cost. Blackwell was still inside, facing Valerius's wrath, his fate uncertain. She wanted to go back, to help him, but she knew it was futile. She was unarmed, outnumbered, and she had a duty to fulfill. She had to get the evidence to someone who could expose Valerius's treachery, someone who could save her father, someone who could save Aldrich. She made her way through the darkened streets, avoiding the patrols, keeping to the shadows, her mind racing, trying to formulate a plan. She needed to reach someone trustworthy, someone with influence, someone who could challenge the king. She thought of Lady Beatrice, a distant cousin of the king, a woman known for her sharp wit and her independent spirit. Lady Beatrice had always been sympathetic to Isolde's plight, but she had been hesitant to openly oppose Valerius, fearing his power. Isolde knew that reaching Lady Beatrice would be risky, but it was her only hope. She made her way to Lady Beatrice's residence, a modest but elegant townhouse on the outskirts of the capital. She slipped past the guards, using her knowledge of the city's back alleys and hidden pathways, her determination fueled by desperation. She found Lady Beatrice in her private study, reading by candlelight. Lady Beatrice looked up, startled, as Isolde burst into the room, her face pale, her clothes disheveled. "Isolde, what has happened?" Lady Beatrice asked, her voice filled with concern. Isolde quickly recounted the events of the evening, the secret meeting, the escape, Blackwell's sacrifice. She showed Lady Beatrice the forged documents, the list of bribed witnesses, the evidence that proved Valerius's treachery. Lady Beatrice listened intently, her expression growing increasingly grave. She examined the evidence, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She saw the truth, the undeniable proof of Valerius's crimes. "This is damning," Lady Beatrice said, her voice low and steady. "But it is also dangerous. If Valerius discovers that you have this, I know," Isolde said, her voice trembling. "But I had to do something. I could not let him win." Lady Beatrice placed a comforting hand on Isolde's arm. "You are a brave woman, Isolde," she said. "And you are not alone. I will help you." Lady Beatrice promised to present the evidence to the king, to expose Valerius's treachery, to demand justice for Lord Edmund. She knew that it would be a difficult battle, that Valerius would fight back, that the king might not be willing to listen. But she was willing to risk it, for the sake of justice, for the sake of Isolde. Isolde felt a wave of relief wash over her, a glimmer of hope in the darkness. She had found an ally, a powerful friend who could help her fight back. But her relief was tempered by worry, by the gnawing fear for Blackwell's safety. She spent the night at Lady Beatrice's residence, hidden in a secret chamber, safe from Valerius's reach. She could not sleep, her mind tormented by images of Blackwell, of his bravery, of his sacrifice. As dawn approached, she went out into the garden, seeking solace in the quiet beauty of the morning. The sky was clear, the stars still visible, fading slowly as the sun began to rise. She looked up at the constellations, remembering the nights she had spent with Blackwell, learning the names, the stories, the myths. She remembered his touch, his voice, his love. She whispered a prayer to the stars, a plea for his safety, for his return, for their future. She had to believe that he was still alive, that he would find a way to escape, that they would be reunited. Suddenly, she heard a noise, a faint rustling in the bushes. She tensed, her heart pounding in her chest, fearing that it was Valerius's men, come to capture her. But then, a figure emerged from the shadows, a familiar figure, cloaked and hooded, his face hidden from view. "Aldrich?" she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief, with hope. The figure stepped forward, lowering his hood, revealing his face, scarred but smiling, his eyes filled with relief, with love. "Isolde," he said, his voice rough with emotion. She ran to him, throwing her arms around him, holding him tight, tears streaming down her face. He held her close, his body trembling, his warmth reassuring, his presence a miracle. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. I thought I had lost you." "I told you," he said, his voice a low murmur. "Not today. Not yet." He explained how he had managed to escape, using his skills, his knowledge of the palace, his cunning. He had been wounded, but not seriously. He had evaded his pursuers, made his way through the city, found her, guided by the stars. They stood there, beneath the cloak of stars, reunited, their love reaffirmed, their bond strengthened by the trials they had faced. The dawn was breaking, casting a golden glow over the horizon, a symbol of hope, of a new beginning, of a future together. The danger was not over, the battle was not yet won, but they were together, and that was all that mattered. They had each other and they had a fighting chance. Chapter 11. The Lion's Denver. With Blackwell's unexpected return, a surge of renewed hope coursed through Isolde. They were together, and the evidence against Valerius was secured, entrusted to the formidable Lady Beatrice. However, the looming trial of Lord Edmund cast a long shadow, a stark reminder of the perilous path ahead. They knew Valerius would not simply surrender, he would fight, using every weapon in his considerable arsenal. The day of the trial arrived with a somber sky, mirroring the heavy atmosphere that gripped the capital. The great hall of the palace was packed, every noble, every courtier, every person of influence crammed into the space, their eyes fixed on the raised dais where King Oberon sat, his face an inscrutable mask. Beside him, Valerius stood, resplendent in his finery, a smug confidence radiating from him. Lord Edmund was brought in, shackled and pale, but his eyes, when they met Isolde's across the hall, held a flicker of pride, of unwavering love. It was a silent message, a reassurance that he was prepared to face his fate, whatever it might be. Isolde, standing beside Blackwell, felt a tremor of fear, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of determination. She would not be intimidated. She would not be silenced. She would fight for her father, for her family, for their future. The trial began with a recitation of the charges against Lord Edmund, a litany of fabricated accusations, of twisted truths and outright lies. The prosecutor, a man handpicked by Valerius, presented the evidence, a collection of forged documents and coerced testimonies, painting a picture of Lord Edmund as a traitor, a conspirator, a threat to the crown. Isolde listened, her anger building with each word, her fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to scream, to denounce the lies, to expose Valerius's treachery. But she knew she had to wait, to bide her time, to let Lady Beatrice make her move. Blackwell, standing beside her, was a pillar of strength, his presence a calming influence, his hand subtly resting on the small of her back, a silent reassurance of his support. He, too, was seething with anger, but he controlled it, his focus sharp, his mind alert, watching for any sign of weakness, any opportunity to strike. After the prosecution rested, it was Lord Edmund's turn to speak. He was given the opportunity to defend himself, to refute the charges, to present his own evidence. But he knew it was a futile gesture. The trial was a sham, the outcome predetermined. He spoke with dignity, with courage, with resignation. He denied the charges. He proclaimed his loyalty to the crown. He spoke of his years of service, of the battles he had fought, of the blood he had spilled for the kingdom. But his words fell on deaf ears. The king remained unmoved, his gaze cold and indifferent. Valerius watched with a smirk, his victory seemingly assured. Then, just as the king was about to pronounce judgment, Lady Beatrice rose from her seat, her voice ringing out across the silent hall. "Your Majesty," she said, her tone firm and unwavering. "I have evidence that proves Lord Edmund's innocence. Evidence that exposes the true traitor Lord Valerius." A gasp went through the hall. All eyes turned to Lady Beatrice, their expressions a mixture of shock, disbelief, and hope. Valerius's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. The king, startled, leaned forward, his gaze fixed on Lady Beatrice. Lady Beatrice presented the evidence that Isolde and Blackwell had gathered, the forged documents, the list of bribed witnesses, the testimony of Valerius's former servant. She spoke with eloquence, with passion, with conviction. She exposed Valerius's plot, his treachery, his manipulation of the king, his attempt to seize Evermere for his own gain. The hall was in an uproar. The nobles began to murmur, to argue, to question. The king, visibly shaken, demanded an explanation from Valerius. Valerius, cornered, attempted to deny the accusations, to discredit Lady Beatrice, to claim that it was all a conspiracy against him. But the evidence was overwhelming. The truth was undeniable. The tide had turned. Then, Blackwell stepped forward, his voice echoing through the hall. "I, too, have witnessed Valerius's treachery," he said. "I was present at a secret meeting where he and his conspirators plotted to frame Lord Edmund. I heard them with my own ears." His testimony, coming from a knight of renowned skill and questionable reputation, added further weight to Lady Beatrice's accusations. It was a risky move, exposing himself to Valerius's wrath, but it was a necessary one. The king, faced with overwhelming evidence, with the growing dissent of his court, had no choice but to act. He ordered Valerius's arrest. He declared Lord Edmund innocent. He promised a full investigation into the conspiracy. A cheer went up from the hall, a roar of approval, of relief, of justice. Isolde felt a wave of emotion wash over her, tears streaming down her face. Her father was free. Evermere was safe. Valerius was defeated. She turned to Blackwell, her eyes filled with gratitude, with admiration, with love. He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his face, a smile of triumph, of relief, of shared victory. But the battle was not yet over. Valerius, even in defeat, was a dangerous enemy. He had allies, resources, and a burning desire for revenge. They had won a major victory, but the war was far from over. They had stepped into the lion's den and emerged victorious, but the lion was still wounded, still dangerous, and still lurking in the shadows. However, a king's word, a noble's intervention, and a knight's testimony have turned the tables. Chapter 12. Echoes of Betrayal. The immediate aftermath of the trial was a whirlwind of activity. Lord Edmund, released from his confinement, was greeted with cheers and jubilation by the people of the capital, his reputation restored, his name cleared. Isolde embraced her father, tears of relief and joy streaming down her face. The weight of weeks of fear and uncertainty finally lifted. Valerius, stripped of his titles and his lands, was imprisoned, awaiting his own trial, his fate uncertain. But even in captivity, he was a threat, his influence reaching beyond the prison walls, his allies plotting his escape, his revenge brewing. Isolde and Blackwell knew that they could not rest, that they had to remain vigilant, that Valerius would not give up easily. They began to consolidate their position, strengthening their alliances, preparing for the inevitable counterattack. Lord Edmund, though weakened by his imprisonment, was determined to reclaim his rightful place, to rebuild Evermere, to ensure the safety of his people. He was grateful to Isolde, to Blackwell, to Lady Beatrice for their courage, their loyalty, their love. He saw the bond between Isolde and Blackwell, the unspoken connection, the deep affection that had blossomed between them. He approved wholeheartedly. He knew that Blackwell was a good man, a worthy man, a man who would protect Isolde, who would love her, who would cherish her. One evening, as they sat together in the palace gardens, celebrating their victory, Lord Edmund raised a glass in a toast. To Isolde, he said, his voice filled with emotion, "My brave, resourceful daughter, who never gave up hope, who fought for justice, who saved us all." He then turned to Blackwell, his gaze unwavering. And to Sir Aldrich Blackwell, he said, "A knight of honor, a man of courage, a true friend, a man who has earned my trust, my respect, my gratitude." He paused, then added, with a twinkle in his eye, and perhaps something more. Isolde blushed, her cheeks turning crimson. Blackwell smiled, his eyes meeting Isolde's, a silent acknowledgement of their shared feelings, their unspoken love. But the celebration was short-lived. News arrived that Valerius had escaped from prison, aided by his loyalists, his whereabouts unknown. He was on the run, a fugitive, but he was also a dangerous enemy, plotting his revenge, seeking to reclaim his power, to destroy them all. The escape cast a shadow over their victory, a reminder of the fragility of their peace, the constant threat that loomed over them. They knew that they had to find Valerius, to capture him, to bring him to justice, before he could strike again. Blackwell took the lead, using his network of informants, his knowledge of the city's underworld, his skills as a tracker, to hunt down Valerius, to uncover his hiding place, to anticipate his next move. Isolde, too, was involved, using her own contacts, her knowledge of the court, her intuition, to gather information, to identify Valerius's allies, to thwart his plans. They worked together, seamlessly, their bond strengthened by the shared danger, their trust in each other unwavering. They were a team, a partnership, a force to be reckoned with. Then, a disturbing discovery was made. A secret message, intercepted by one of Blackwell's informants, revealed that Valerius was not acting alone, that he had a powerful ally within the court, someone who had been secretly supporting him, someone who had been betraying them all. The message did not reveal the identity of the traitor, but it hinted at a connection to Blackwell's past, to the events that had led to his disgrace, to the loss of his love. Blackwell was shaken, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of anger, disbelief, and pain. He realized that the shadows of his past were not yet behind him, that they had returned to haunt him, to threaten everything he held dear. He suspected, with a growing dread, that the traitor was someone he had once trusted, someone he had once loved. He remembered the betrayal that had shattered his life, the lies that had destroyed his reputation, the woman who had broken his heart. He shared his suspicions with Isolde, his voice trembling with emotion. He told her the full story of his past, of his love for Alara, not Isolde's maid, a different one, of her betrayal, of his fall from grace. He had never spoken of it to anyone before, not in such detail, not with such vulnerability. Isolde listened, her heart aching for him, her anger building towards the woman who had hurt him so deeply. She saw the pain in his eyes, the scars that he still carried, the echoes of betrayal that haunted him. "We will find them, Aldrich," she said, her voice firm, her hand reaching out to hold his. "We will expose them. We will make them pay." Their shared past, a mirror of betrayal and lost love, had come back to haunt them. The echoes of his past were intertwined with the present danger, revealing a deeper conspiracy, a more insidious plot than they had ever imagined. The hunt for Valerius had become personal, A quest for justice, for redemption, for closure. Chapter 13. The Unspoken Vow. The revelation that Valerius's escape was aided by someone connected to Blackwell's past cast a long, chilling shadow over their efforts. The hunt for the fugitive lord became intertwined with a desperate search for the traitor, a quest that forced Blackwell to confront the demons he had long suppressed. The pain of his past betrayal, the loss of his honor, and the lingering suspicion surrounding the woman he had once loved, Alara, resurfaced with a vengeance. Isolde, witnessing his struggle, felt a surge of protectiveness, a fierce determination to help him heal, to find the truth, to clear his name once and for all. She saw the vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior, the deep-seated wounds that had never fully healed. They delved deeper into Blackwell's past, seeking out old contacts, revisiting forgotten places, piecing together the fragments of a shattered life. They discovered that Alara, after Blackwell's disgrace, had married a wealthy, influential nobleman, Lord Beaumont, a man known for his ambition and his ruthlessness. Lord Beaumont, they learned, had been a close associate of Valerius's, a silent partner in his schemes, a man who had benefited greatly from Blackwell's downfall. It was a disturbing connection, a possible link to the current conspiracy, a hint of a deeper, more insidious plot. Blackwell, despite his suspicions, struggled to believe that Alara could be involved. He remembered her as kind, compassionate, loving. He could not reconcile the image of the woman he had loved with the possibility of her treachery. Perhaps she was forced, he said, his voice filled with doubt, with hope. Perhaps she was coerced, threatened, sold, while understanding his reluctance, remained more pragmatic. We cannot rule anything out, Aldrich, she said. We must follow the evidence, wherever it leads. They decided to investigate Lord Beaumont, to uncover his connections to Valerius, to determine his role in the escape, to find out the truth about Alara. It was a risky undertaking. Lord Beaumont was a powerful man, with many allies, with a reputation for violence. They traveled to Beaumont's estate, a sprawling manor house surrounded by vast lands, a symbol of his wealth and his influence. They posed as traveling merchants, seeking an audience with Lord Beaumont, hoping to glean information, to observe, to assess. They were granted an audience, but it was Alara who greeted them, not Lord Beaumont. She had aged, her beauty faded, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and fear. Blackwell was stunned, his heart pounding in his chest, his emotions in turmoil. He had not seen her in years, and the sight of her, the memories she evoked, overwhelmed him. Alara, too, was shocked, her face paling, her hands trembling. She recognized him immediately, despite the years, despite the changes. Aldrich, she whispered, her voice barely audible. What are you doing here? Blackwell, struggling to control his emotions, explained their fabricated purpose, their supposed interest in trading with Lord Beaumont. Alara listened, her eyes darting nervously around the room, her body tense, her demeanor guarded. Isolde, observing Alara closely, saw the fear in her eyes, the subtle signs of distress, the unspoken secrets. She sensed that Alara was not a willing participant in Valerius's schemes, that she was trapped, controlled, afraid. As they were leaving, Alara subtly slipped a small, folded piece of parchment into Isolde's hand, a secret message, a desperate plea for help. The message, written in Alara's hand, confirmed their suspicions. Lord Beaumont was indeed involved with Valerius. He had aided in his escape. He was part of a larger conspiracy to overthrow the king, to seize control of the kingdom. Alara, the message revealed, had been forced into the marriage. She was being held against her will. She was a prisoner in her own home. She begged for their help, for their intervention, for her freedom. Blackwell, reading the message, felt a wave of emotions wash over him. Relief that Alara was not the traitor he had feared. Anger at Lord Beaumont, at Valerius, at the injustice of it all. And a renewed determination to save her, to protect her, to atone for his past mistakes. He looked to Isolde and declared, "We must free her." Isolde nodded, her eyes locking with his. "We will." They made a silent vow, an unspoken promise, to rescue Alara, to expose the conspiracy, to bring justice to those who had wronged them. Their personal quests had merged, their love for each other intertwined with their shared desire for redemption, for a future free from the shadows of the past. Their unspoken vow, forged in the crucible of danger and fueled by a love that had defied betrayal, was their guiding star. Chapter 14. A Dance with Deception. Rescuing Alara from Lord Beaumont's heavily guarded estate was a formidable task, requiring careful planning, precise execution, and a healthy dose of deception. Isolde and Blackwell knew they could not simply storm the manor. They needed a strategy, a way to infiltrate the estate, to reach Alara without alerting Beaumont or his men. They spent days studying the layout of the estate, observing the routines of the guards, identifying weaknesses in the security, formulating a plan. They decided to use the upcoming Midsummer's Eve celebration, a lavish feast hosted by Lord Beaumont, as their cover. It was a risky gambit, placing them directly in the lion's den, but it was also their best opportunity to get close to Alara, to spirit her away unnoticed. Isolde, using her connections and her ingenuity, secured invitations to the feast, presenting themselves as distant relatives of a minor noble family, eager to curry favor with Lord Beaumont. Blackwell, with his ability to blend in, disguised himself as a member of the serving staff, gaining access to the inner workings of the manor, observing the movements of the guards, mapping out the escape route. The Midsummer's Eve celebration was a grand affair, the manor house ablaze with light, the air filled with music and laughter, the tables laden with food and wine. Nobles and dignitaries from across the kingdom were in attendance, oblivious to the drama that was about to unfold beneath the surface of the festivities. Isolde, dressed in a borrowed gown, played the part of the charming guest, engaging in polite conversation, flattering Lord Beaumont, distracting him with her wit and her beauty. She danced with him, a carefully choreographed dance of deception, her eyes constantly searching for Alara, for an opportunity to make contact. Blackwell, moving through the shadows, disguised as a servant, observed the movements of the guards, located Alara's chambers, and prepared the escape route. He was a ghost, a silent presence, his every move calculated, his focus unwavering. He found Alara confined to her chambers, guarded by two burly men, her face pale and drawn, her eyes filled with despair. He knew he had to act quickly before the opportunity was lost. He created a diversion, a carefully orchestrated series of events that drew the guards away from Alara's chambers, leaving her momentarily unguarded. He slipped into the room, his presence startling her, his finger pressed to his lips, signaling her to remain silent. He quickly explained the plan, the escape route, the rendezvous point. Alara, her eyes filled with hope, nodded her understanding, her fear replaced by a flicker of determination. As they were about to leave, Lord Beaumont, alerted by a suspicious servant, burst into the room, his face contorted in rage, his sword drawn. He had discovered their plan, their deception, their betrayal. "You!" he roared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "You dare interfere with my affairs?" Blackwell stepped forward, shielding Alara, his own sword drawn, his stance calm and poised, his eyes fixed on Beaumont. "She is not your property, Beaumont," he said, his voice cold and steady. "She is a free woman, and she is leaving with me." A tense standoff ensued, the two men facing each other, their swords gleaming in the candlelight, their hatred palpable. Isolde, hearing the commotion, rushed to the scene, her heart pounding in her chest, her fear for Blackwell overwhelming. She arrived just as the fight erupted, a clash of steel, a whirlwind of motion, a deadly dance between two skilled warriors. Blackwell, despite his years of exile, was still a formidable opponent, his skill honed by years of battle, his determination fueled by love. He fought with a ferocity and a grace that belied his age, his movements precise, his strikes deadly. He parried Beaumont's attacks, deflected his blows, slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. Isolde, watching from the sidelines, her heart in her throat, could only pray for his safety, for his victory. She knew that he was fighting not just for Alara, but for her, for their future, for redemption. Finally, after a grueling exchange, Blackwell disarmed Beaumont, his sword pointed at his opponent's throat, his victory assured. He could have killed him, ended his life, but he chose not to. He was not a murderer. He was a knight, bound by a code of honor, however tarnished it might be. "Leave," Blackwell said, his voice cold and commanding. "Leave and never return, or I will not be so merciful next time." Beaumont, defeated and humiliated, scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of rage and shame. He fled the room, his threats echoing behind him, his power broken, his reign of terror ended. Blackwell, his chest heaving, his body trembling, turned to Alara, his eyes filled with relief, with tenderness. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice soft, concerned. Alara nodded, her tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Aldrich," she whispered.
You saved me.
Isolde rushed to Alara's side, embracing her, comforting her, reassuring her that she was safe. They had done it. They had rescued Alara. They had defied Beaumont. They had won. As they escaped the manor, slipping away unnoticed amidst the chaos of the feast, they knew that the danger was not over. Valerius was still at large, Beaumont would seek revenge, and the conspiracy they had uncovered was still a threat. But they were together, they were free, and they were ready to face whatever came next. Their dance with deception had ended in a triumphant escape, a testament to their courage, their ingenuity, and the enduring power of love. Chapter 15. The Weight of Honor. With Alara safely hidden, the focus shifted to bringing down the remaining conspirators and locating Valerius. Alara's testimony was crucial, providing first-hand knowledge of Lord Beaumont's involvement and, more importantly, confirming the existence of a larger network seeking to destabilize the kingdom. However, her safety was paramount. They knew Beaumont and Valerius would stop at nothing to silence her. Isolde, drawing on her knowledge of the court and its hidden alliances, began to identify potential members of the conspiracy. It was a delicate and dangerous task, as any misstep could alert their enemies and jeopardize their efforts. Blackwell, meanwhile, used his network of informants to track Valerius's movements, hoping to capture him before he could cause further harm. The weight of responsibility pressed heavily on Isolde. She was no longer just fighting for her father's freedom, she was fighting for the stability of the entire kingdom, for the safety of its people, and for the future she hoped to build with Blackwell. She felt the burden of leadership, the constant pressure to make the right decisions, the fear of failure. Blackwell, sensing her struggle, offered his support, his reassurance, his love. He reminded her that she was not alone, that they were in this together, that they would face whatever challenges came their way, side by side. "You are strong, Isolde," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "Stronger than you know. You have the courage of a lioness, the wisdom of a queen, the heart of an angel." His words, his belief in her, gave her strength, renewed her determination, eased her fears. She leaned on him, drawing comfort from his presence, his touch, his unwavering love. They discovered that the conspiracy extended far beyond Lord Beaumont, reaching into the highest echelons of the court, involving several influential nobles who had secretly supported Valerius, hoping to profit from his rise to power. It was a web of deceit and treachery, a cancer that had infected the heart of the kingdom. Alara, recovering from her ordeal, provided valuable insights into the conspirators' plans, revealing their ultimate goal, to assassinate King Oberon and place a puppet ruler on the throne, someone they could control, someone who would serve their interests. The revelation sent a chill down Isolde's spine. The stakes were even higher than she had imagined. They were not just fighting for justice, they were fighting for the very survival of the kingdom. They decided to present their findings to Lady Beatrice, trusting in her loyalty and her influence with the king. Lady Beatrice, shocked by the extent of the conspiracy, agreed to help them, promising to present the evidence to Oberon, to demand immediate action. But the king, weakened by illness and manipulated by his advisors, was hesitant to believe them, reluctant to act against such powerful nobles. He feared a civil war, a rebellion, a collapse of his authority. Isolde, frustrated by the king's inaction, decided to take matters into her own hands. She used her influence, her connections, her reputation to rally support for their cause, to convince the undecided nobles to join them, to expose the conspirators. She spoke with passion, with conviction, with courage. She reminded them of their duty, of their honor, of their loyalty to the kingdom. She appealed to their sense of justice, their fear of chaos, their desire for peace. Blackwell, standing by her side, supported her efforts, lending his strength, his reputation, his unwavering presence. He was her shield, her protector, her partner. Slowly but surely, they began to sway public opinion, to turn the tide against the conspirators. The nobles, realizing the extent of the threat, began to distance themselves from Valerius and his allies, fearing the consequences of their treachery. Then a breakthrough came. One of Blackwell's informants discovered Valerius's hiding place, a remote hunting lodge in the Whispering Woods, the very place where Blackwell had once sought refuge. It was a fitting irony, a twist of fate that brought them full circle. They prepared to move against Valerius, to capture him, to bring him to justice. It was a dangerous mission. Valerius was desperate, cornered, and he would not surrender easily. Before they left, Isolde and Blackwell shared a quiet moment together, a moment of reflection, of intimacy. They knew that this could be their last battle, that they might not both survive. "I love you, Isolde," Blackwell said, his voice filled with emotion. "I have loved you from the moment I saw you again, standing in that courtyard, your eyes filled with fire, your spirit unbroken." Isolde, her heart overflowing with love, replied, "And I love you, Aldrich. You have shown me what it means to be brave, to be strong, to be loved." They embraced, a long, passionate embrace, a silent vow exchanged between two souls bound by love, by duty, by destiny. They had faced betrayal, danger, and uncertainty, but their love had endured, grown stronger, become a beacon of hope in a world shrouded in darkness. They were ready to face their final challenge, to fight for their future, to secure their love. Chapter 16. Flames of Rebellion. The journey to the Whispering Woods was fraught with tension. The air was thick with anticipation, the silence broken only by the rhythmic thud of their horses' hooves and the rustling of leaves. Isolde, riding beside Blackwell, felt a mixture of fear and determination. This was it, the final confrontation, the culmination of everything they had fought for. They reached the hunting lodge as dusk began to settle, the sky painted with hues of orange and purple. The lodge, a small, sturdy structure, was nestled amidst the towering trees, seemingly deserted. But Isolde knew better. Valerius was there, waiting, along with whatever remnants of his loyalists he had managed to gather. Blackwell, ever the strategist, surveyed the scene, assessing the risks, formulating a plan. They could not simply charge, and they needed to be cautious, to use the element of surprise to their advantage. "We'll approach from the rear," Blackwell whispered, his voice low and steady. "There's a small, overgrown path that leads to a back entrance. It's less likely to be guarded." Isolde nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of the sword she had strapped to her side. She was no warrior, but she was prepared to fight, to defend herself, to protect Aldrich. They dismounted, tethering their horses in a hidden grove, and made their way through the dense undergrowth, their movements silent, their senses alert. The air grew colder, heavier, the scent of wood smoke and damp earth filling their nostrils. As they neared the lodge, they heard voices, muffled by the thick walls, but clearly agitated, arguing. Valerius was losing control, his carefully laid plans crumbling around him. They reached the back entrance, a small, wooden door, partially hidden by overgrown vines. Blackwell carefully tested the door. It was unlocked. He exchanged a look with Isolde, a silent acknowledgement of the danger ahead, a shared determination to face it together. He pushed the door open, slowly, silently, and they slipped inside, finding themselves in a small, dimly lit pantry. The voices from the main room were louder now, clearer, revealing the desperate situation of Valerius and his remaining followers. They crept along a narrow corridor, their footsteps muffled by the thick rugs, their hearts pounding in their chests. They reached the doorway to the main room, peering cautiously inside. Valerius was standing before a roaring fireplace, his face illuminated by the flickering flames, his expression a mixture of rage and desperation. He was surrounded by a handful of his loyalists, armed and armored, their faces grim, their loyalty waning. "We are trapped," one of the men shouted, his voice filled with panic. "Blackwell and the Lady Isolde, they are closing in." Silence. Valerius roared, his voice echoing through the room. "We will not surrender. We will fight to the death." But his words lacked conviction. He knew he was defeated. His rebellion had failed. His dreams of power were shattered. Blackwell stepped into the room, Isolde by his side, their swords drawn, their faces set in expressions of grim determination. "It's over, Valerius," Blackwell said, his voice cold and commanding. "Surrender now, and you might live to see another day." Valerius turned, his eyes blazing with hatred, his hand reaching for the sword at his side. "Never," he screamed. "I will never surrender to you, Blackwell. You traitor." He lunged at Blackwell, his sword flashing in the firelight, his attack desperate, fueled by rage and madness. Blackwell parried the blow, deflecting the attack with ease, his movements calm and controlled, his skill far superior to Valerius's. A fierce sword fight ensued, the clash of steel echoing through the lodge, the two men locked in a deadly dance. Isolde, watching from the sidelines, her heart in her throat, could only pray for Blackwell's safety, for his victory. The remaining loyalists, seeing their leader engaged in a losing battle, hesitated, their resolve wavering. Some dropped their weapons, surrendering, while others fled into the night, abandoning Valerius to his fate. Blackwell, despite his superior skill, fought with restraint, unwilling to kill Valerius unless absolutely necessary. He disarmed him repeatedly, offering him a chance to surrender, to avoid further bloodshed. But Valerius, consumed by hatred and despair, refused to yield. He fought on with a reckless abandon, his attacks growing increasingly desperate, his movements sloppy. Finally, in a swift, decisive move, Blackwell disarmed Valerius for the last time, his sword pointed at his opponent's throat. "It's over," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Yield, Valerius. It's your only chance." Valerius, his chest heaving, his body covered in sweat, his eyes filled with defeat, looked at Blackwell, a flicker of fear finally piercing his rage. He knew he was beaten. He had lost. But then, with a sudden, unexpected movement, he lunged forward, not at Blackwell, but at Isolde, grabbing her, pulling her in front of him, using her as a shield. "Drop your sword, Blackwell," he screamed, his voice hoarse, his eyes wild. "Or I will kill her." Blackwell froze, his sword dropping to his side, his face paling, his heart pounding in his chest. He had been outmaneuvered, outsmarted, his love for Isolde used against him. The lodge erupted in flames as one of the fleeing loyalists, seeking revenge, tossed a lit torch into a pile of dry wood near the entrance.
"Run,"
yelled Blackwell. "Not without you," Isolde responded. Valerius, seeing his chance, shoved Isolde towards Blackwell and attempted to escape through another exit. However, weakened, and with his sense of direction in disarray because of the smoke, he stumbled. Blackwell caught Isolde, turned towards the main exit, through the engulfing fire, and with a determined sprint, made it to the outside. They watched as the hunting lodge, consumed by flames, collapsed into a pile of rubble, a fiery tomb for Valerius and his failed rebellion. The flames of rebellion had been extinguished, but the scars of the battle, both physical and emotional, would remain. Their love, however, had survived, stronger and more resilient than ever before. Chapter 17. The Shattered Mirror. The destruction of the hunting lodge marked the end of Valerius's rebellion, but it did not bring immediate peace. The conspiracy had reached deep into the court, and the task of identifying and rooting out the remaining conspirators fell to Isolde, Blackwell, and Lady Beatrice. The king, finally convinced of the threat, authorized a full investigation, granting them broad powers to interrogate suspects and examine evidence. The process was slow and arduous, filled with resistance and denial. Many of the nobles implicated in the conspiracy were powerful and influential, and they used every means at their disposal to protect themselves, to obstruct justice, to sow doubt. Isolde, drawing on her knowledge of the court and its intricate web of alliances, proved invaluable in identifying the key players, uncovering their hidden connections, and exposing their lies. She was relentless, her determination fueled by a fierce sense of justice and a deep-seated love for her kingdom. Blackwell, with his network of informants and his experience in tracking down criminals, focused on gathering evidence, securing testimonies, and ensuring the safety of witnesses. He was a shield against the conspirators' attempts at intimidation and retaliation, his reputation as a formidable warrior a deterrent to violence. Lady Beatrice, using her influence and her legal expertise, navigated the complex political landscape, ensuring that the investigation remained on track, that due process was followed, that justice was served. She was a voice of reason and moderation, a calming influence in a time of turmoil. As they delved deeper into the conspiracy, they discovered that Lord Beaumont, despite his defeat and Alara's escape, had been a key figure, a linchpin in the plot to overthrow the king. He had used his wealth and his connections to finance the rebellion, to recruit allies, to spread disinformation. Alara, now safely hidden and under their protection, provided crucial testimony, detailing Beaumont's involvement, revealing his motivations, and identifying his accomplices. Her courage in speaking out, despite the risks, was instrumental in bringing the conspirators to justice. The investigation revealed a complex network of deceit, betrayal, and ambition, a shattered mirror reflecting the fractured state of the kingdom. Many nobles, driven by greed and a lust for power, had been willing to sacrifice the stability of the realm for their own personal gain. One by one, the conspirators were exposed, their crimes brought to light, their defenses crumbling under the weight of the evidence. Some were arrested, imprisoned, awaiting trial. Others fled, seeking refuge in neighboring kingdoms, becoming fugitives from justice. The king, shaken by the extent of the conspiracy, took steps to reform the court, to purge it of corruption, to restore trust in his leadership. He appointed new advisors, loyal and trustworthy individuals who would help him rebuild the kingdom, to heal the wounds of the past. Isolde, recognized for her courage, her intelligence, and her unwavering loyalty, was offered a position on the king's council, a testament to her abilities and a recognition of her growing influence. She accepted, reluctantly at first, knowing that it would mean spending less time with Blackwell, but determined to serve her kingdom, to make a difference. Blackwell, too, was offered a position of honor, the command of the king's guard, a recognition of his skill as a warrior and his unwavering loyalty. He accepted, knowing that it was his duty, his responsibility, to protect the king and the realm. The shattered mirror of the court was slowly being pieced back together, reflecting a new image, a kingdom cleansed of corruption, a future filled with hope. But the scars of the past remained, a reminder of the fragility of peace, the constant threat of betrayal. Isolde and Blackwell, their love tested by fire, their bond strengthened by adversity, stood together, ready to face whatever challenges the future might hold, their commitment to each other and to their kingdom unwavering. Chapter 18. A Knight's Confession. With the conspiracy dismantled and the kingdom slowly returning to a semblance of order, a sense of quietude settled over Isolde and Blackwell's lives. They had faced danger, betrayal, and the constant threat of death, and now they were finally able to breathe, to reflect, to focus on their future. However, a lingering shadow remained, a personal matter that Blackwell had long avoided, a confession he knew he had to make to Isolde. It concerned the details of his past, specifically the circumstances surrounding his disgrace and the role Alara had played, not as a conspirator, but as a victim of circumstance, manipulated by forces beyond her control. He had told Isolde the broad strokes, but he had withheld certain painful truths, fearing her judgment, fearing rejection. He knew he could not build a future with her on a foundation of half-truths and unspoken secrets. He had to be completely honest, to reveal his vulnerabilities, to trust her with his heart. One evening, as they sat together in the gardens of Evermere Castle, the air filled with the scent of roses and the gentle sound of a nearby fountain, Blackwell decided to speak. Isolde, he began, his voice hesitant, his eyes filled with a mixture of apprehension and love. There is something I need to tell you. Something about my past, about Alara. Isolde, sensing his unease, placed a comforting hand on his arm. I know it's difficult, Aldrich, she said, her voice soft and reassuring. But you can tell me anything. I trust you. And I love you. Her words, her unwavering support, gave him the courage he needed. He took a deep breath and began to speak, recounting the events of his youth, his rise to prominence, his love for Alara, his betrayal. He explained that Alara's father, a minor nobleman deeply in debt to Lord Beaumont, had been pressured to force his daughter into a marriage with the wealthy and influential lord. Beaumont, in turn, had used his influence to frame Blackwell, to destroy his reputation, to remove him as a rival. Alara, he revealed, had not willingly betrayed him. She had been trapped, manipulated, forced to choose between her love for him and the safety of her family. She had chosen to sacrifice her own happiness, to protect her father, to save Blackwell from Beaumont's wrath. He had learned this truth only recently, through Alara's confession and through his own investigation. He had been wrong to blame her, to harbor resentment, to carry the burden of his past for so long. He confessed his guilt, his shame, his regret. He had allowed his anger and his bitterness to blind him, to prevent him from seeing the truth, to understand Alara's sacrifice. Isolde listened intently, her heart aching for him, her eyes filled with compassion. She understood the pain he had endured, the burden he had carried, the weight of his past. Aldrich, she said, her voice trembling slightly. You have nothing to be ashamed of. You were a victim, just as Alara was. You were both manipulated, betrayed by those who sought to destroy you. She reached out, cupping his face in her hands, her thumbs gently wiping away the tears that had welled up in his eyes. It's over now, she said. You are free. Alara is free. You can let go of the past. Blackwell, overwhelmed by her love, her understanding, her forgiveness, leaned into her touch, closing his eyes, savoring the moment, the healing power of her presence. I love you, Isolde, he whispered, his voice choked with emotion. More than words can say. You have given me back my life, my honor, my hope. Isolde smiled, her eyes shining with love. And you have given me mine, Aldrich, she said. You have shown me what it means to be brave, to be strong, to love unconditionally. They embraced a long, tender embrace, a silent promise of a future together, a future free from the shadows of the past, a future built on trust, on honesty, on unwavering love. The night's confession had brought them closer, solidifying their bond, paving the way for a new beginning. He had opened his heart completely, laying bare his vulnerabilities, and she had accepted him, loved him, healed him with her unwavering devotion. The weight of his past, finally lifted, allowed him to step into the light, to embrace the future with open arms. Chapter 19. The Dawn of War. Despite the internal turmoil and the cleansing of the court, an external threat loomed, casting a long shadow over the kingdom. News arrived from the northern borders, carried by weary messengers and grim-faced scouts, of growing unrest among the mountain clans, a fierce and independent people who had long resisted the king's authority. These clans, united under a charismatic and ruthless leader, a warrior known as Torvin Stonehand, were preparing for war. They had amassed a large army, well-equipped and battle-hardened, and were poised to invade the kingdom, seeking to plunder its riches, to overthrow the king. The news sent a wave of fear and uncertainty throughout the realm. The kingdom was still recovering from the recent conspiracy, its resources depleted, its army weakened, its people weary of conflict. King Oberon, despite his recent illness and the challenges he had faced, knew he had to act decisively. He called upon his lords to raise their armies, to prepare for war, to defend the kingdom. Isolde and Blackwell, despite their desire for peace, knew that they had a duty to fulfill, a responsibility to protect their people, to fight for their future. They answered the king's call, rallying the forces of Evermere, preparing for the inevitable conflict. Lord Edmund, though still recovering from his imprisonment, insisted on joining them, on leading his troops into battle, on defending his homeland. He was a warrior, a leader, and he would not stand idly by while his people were threatened. The preparations for war were intense, the days filled with training, drilling, and the gathering of supplies. The atmosphere was tense, the air thick with anticipation, the fear of the unknown palpable. Isolde, despite her lack of combat experience, played a crucial role in the preparations, organizing logistics, managing resources, and boosting morale. She was a leader, a strategist, and her presence inspired confidence, her determination infectious. Blackwell, as commander of the King's Guard and a seasoned warrior, took charge of training the troops, honing their skills, preparing them for the brutal realities of war. He was a demanding but respected leader, his experience and his courage inspiring his men. As the day of departure approached, Isolde and Blackwell shared a quiet moment together, a moment of reflection, of intimacy. They knew that this war would be different, that they would be facing a formidable enemy, that their lives would be on the line. "I fear for you, Aldrich," Isolde said, her voice trembling slightly. "I fear for our future." Blackwell took her hand, his touch reassuring, his eyes filled with love. "We will face this together, Isolde," he said, "as we have faced everything else. We will fight for our kingdom, for our people, for our love." He leaned down, kissing her a long, passionate kiss, a silent vow of devotion, a promise of return. They knew that this might be their last moment together, that they might not both survive the war. But their love was strong, their bond unbreakable, and they would face whatever came their way, side by side. The armies of the kingdom marched north, a vast and diverse force, united by a common purpose, to defend their homeland, to protect their families, to secure their future. Isolde, riding beside Blackwell, felt a surge of pride, of determination, of hope. They reached the northern borders, a rugged and mountainous region, the ancestral lands of the mountain clans. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, a fitting backdrop for the brutal conflict that was about to unfold. The two armies met on a vast, open plain, a field of battle that would soon be stained with blood. The mountain clans, fierce and intimidating, their faces painted with war paint, their weapons gleaming in the sunlight, outnumbered the king's forces. The battle began with a deafening roar, the clash of steel, the screams of the wounded, the chaos of war. Isolde, watching from a nearby hilltop, her heart pounding in her chest, could only pray for Blackwell's safety, for the victory of their forces, for the future of their kingdom. The dawn of war had broken, a fiery and terrifying spectacle, a test of courage, of loyalty, of love. The fate of the kingdom and their own destinies hung in the balance, to be decided on the blood-soaked fields of battle. Chapter 20. The Reckoning of Love and Duty. The battle raged with a ferocity that shook the very ground. The king's army, though outnumbered, fought with courage and determination, inspired by the leadership of Blackwell and Lord Edmund. The mountain clans, fueled by their centuries-old grievances and Torvin's charismatic leadership, were a relentless force, pushing the king's forces back, threatening to overwhelm them. Isolde, watching from the hilltop, felt a knot of fear tighten in her stomach. She saw the tide of battle turning against them, the mountain clans gaining ground, the king's forces faltering. She knew that if they lost this battle, the kingdom would fall, their future would be destroyed. She saw Blackwell, fighting in the thick of the melee, his sword a blur of motion, his armor stained with blood, his face grim with determination. He was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting down enemy warriors, rallying his troops, inspiring them to fight on. She also saw her father, Lord Edmund, fighting with the courage of a lion, despite his age and his recent imprisonment. He was a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance, his presence bolstering the morale of his men. But the mountain clans were too numerous, too fierce. They pressed their attack, relentlessly, pushing the king's forces back towards the edge of the plain, towards a steep cliff. Isolde knew that if they were forced over the cliff, it would be a massacre. The battle would be lost. The kingdom would fall. She had to do something. She could not stand idly by while her loved ones, her people, were slaughtered. She had to act. She made a decision, a desperate gamble, a reckless act of courage. She mounted her horse, drawing her sword, and rode down from the hilltop, towards the battlefield, towards the chaos of war. She rode through the ranks of the king's army, her voice ringing out, clear and strong, rallying the troops, inspiring them to fight on. For Evermere, she shouted. For the king. For freedom. Her presence on the battlefield, a lone woman amidst the carnage, had a profound effect. The soldiers, seeing her courage, her determination, her unwavering loyalty, were inspired. They rallied, renewed their attack, pushing back the mountain clans, stemming the tide of defeat. Blackwell, seeing Isolde on the battlefield, his heart filled with a mixture of fear and pride, fought his way towards her, protecting her, clearing a path for her, his sword a shield against the enemy. Isolde, he shouted, his voice hoarse with concern. What are you doing here? It's too dangerous. I had to do something, Aldrich, she replied, her voice firm, her eyes shining with determination. I could not let them win. Together, they fought side by side, a beacon of hope amidst the chaos, their love for each other a source of strength, their courage infectious. The battle reached its climax. The mountain clans, their advance stalled, their leader, Torvin Stonehand, seeing the tide turning against him, challenged Blackwell to single combat, a duel to decide the fate of the battle. Blackwell accepted the challenge, knowing that it was the only way to end the bloodshed, to secure victory for his people, to protect Isolde. The two warriors faced each other, their swords raised, their eyes locked in a deadly gaze. The battle around them ceased, all eyes focused on the duel between the two champions. It was a brutal and grueling fight, a test of skill, of strength, of endurance. Torvin, a fierce and experienced warrior, fought with the ferocity of a cornered beast, his attacks relentless, his movements unpredictable. Blackwell, despite his fatigue and his injuries, fought with the courage of a lion, his skill honed by years of battle, his determination fueled by love. He parried Torvin's attacks, deflected his blows, slowly but surely gaining the upper hand. He saw an opening, a weakness in Torvin's defense, and he seized it. With a swift, decisive move, he disarmed Torvin, his sword pointed at his opponent's throat. The battle was over. The mountain clans, their leader defeated, surrendered, their rebellion crushed. A cheer went up from the king's army, a roar of triumph, of relief, of victory. Isolde, her heart overflowing with joy, rushed to Blackwell's side, embracing him, holding him tight, tears streaming down her face. They had won. They had saved the kingdom. They had secured their future. The reckoning of love and duty had come, and they had emerged victorious, their love tested by fire, their bond strengthened by adversity, their future bright with hope. The battle was over, the war was won, and a new era of peace and prosperity dawned upon the kingdom. Epilogue. The years that followed the defeat of the mountain clans were a time of peace and rebuilding. The kingdom, scarred by war and internal strife, slowly healed, its people united by a shared sense of purpose and a renewed faith in their leadership. King Oberon, humbled by the near collapse of his reign, ruled with wisdom and compassion, guided by the counsel of Isolde and Lady Beatrice. Evermere, once a symbol of defiance and rebellion, became a beacon of hope and prosperity. Lord Edmund, restored to his rightful position, oversaw the rebuilding of his lands and the strengthening of his defenses, ensuring that his people would never again face the threat of invasion or internal betrayal. Isolde and Blackwell, their love forged in the crucible of conflict, were married in a grand ceremony, attended by nobles and commoners alike, a celebration of their courage, their loyalty, and their enduring love. They settled in Evermere Castle, raising a family, their children a testament to their union, a symbol of the future they had fought so hard to secure. Blackwell, no longer a knight of shadows, but a respected lord and a trusted advisor to the king, served his kingdom with honor and distinction. He never forgot the lessons of his past, the pain of betrayal, the importance of loyalty. He was a just and compassionate leader, beloved by his people, respected by his peers. Isolde, balancing her duties as a wife and mother with her responsibilities as a member of the King's Council, became a powerful voice for reform, advocating for justice, for compassion, for the rights of the common people. She was a visionary leader, her wisdom and her courage inspiring those around her. Ilara, freed from her forced marriage and the shadows of her past, found peace and solace in a quiet life, far from the intrigues of the court. She remained grateful to Isolde and Blackwell for their rescue, their friendship, and their unwavering support. She never forgot the kindness they had shown her, the second chance they had given her, the opportunity to rebuild her life. The kingdom prospered, its people flourished, and the memory of the dark days of Valerius's rebellion and the mountain clan uprising faded into the past, becoming a cautionary tale, a reminder of the fragility of peace, the importance of vigilance. As the years turned into decades, Isolde and Blackwell grew old together, their love enduring, their bond unbreakable. They had faced countless challenges, overcome seemingly insurmountable obstacles, and emerged victorious, their love a beacon of hope in a world often shrouded in darkness. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony of Evermere Castle, watching the sunset paint the sky with vibrant colors, Blackwell took Isolde's hand, his touch gentle, his eyes filled with love. "We have lived a good life, Isolde," he said, his voice soft, his gaze unwavering. "A life filled with adventure, with danger, with love." Isolde smiled, her heart overflowing with gratitude, with contentment. "We have," she replied, "and I would not trade it for anything. We have built a legacy, Aldrich. A legacy of love and loyalty." They watched the sun dip below the horizon, the sky ablaze with a final burst of color, a fitting end to a beautiful day. Their journey had been long and arduous, filled with trials and tribulations, but they had faced it together, their love their guiding star, their courage their unwavering shield. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, they knew that their love, like the stars, would endure, a timeless testament to the power of hope, the strength of loyalty, and the enduring beauty of a love that had conquered all. The end.